Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Joe Zappa answered the door. "What do you want from me?" He inhaled deeply and stumbled backward. Thump. He hit the floor. His daughter Janet was kneeling beside him when he opened his eyes. Tom, Janet's boyfriend, extended his arm to help Joe onto his feet, and Joe clutched Tom's wrist. "Thanks, Doc," Joe forced out the words as he stood. The couple had wanted to share the exciting news of their engagement with Janet's father first and rushed over to his place once they composed their own enthusiasm. But they arrived to find the door wide open and Joe lying on the hardwood floor. Janet assisted her father into a chair. She insisted that he get checked out by a doctor, but Joe wanted to forego the entire incident, and he laughed as he looked over at Tom. "You're a doctor? Dr. Jones?" He emphasized Jones. "What kind of a name is Jones anyway?" "I'm not a medical doctor," said Tom, as if questioning Joe's humor amid the situation. "Psychology's a kind of medicine," Joe said. He turned his attention back to Janet and was about to rebuke her for fussing over him when he noticed the sparkling bling on her hand. "Welcome to the family, Doc." Janet glared at her father. She wasn't going to let him change the subject so easily. Not this time. Joe knew the question on the tip of his daughter's tongue. He answered her before she asked it. "There was a knock on the door. When I opened it, a man without a mouth was standing there," he said, as if it were the same old story. Janet broke the awkward silence that followed. She looked at Tom. "Now that the cat is out of the bag, or so to speak, I want to add that this wasn't Dad's first encounter." Janet looked back at her father with worry in her eyes, and Joe nodded, giving her his unspoken permission to divulge the story about his recent experience in the supermarket. She told Tom that she left her father at the deli counter for a few minutes, and when she returned, her father was acting hysterical and paranoid. He was practically accusing the man behind the deli counter of lying because he did not see the man without the mouth as well. Dad said that the strange man disappeared into one of the aisles, but when I searched, he was gone. More silence. Then Tom spoke. "Maybe I can help you." Joe knew he wasn't crazy. He also knew that no human could live without a mouth, but the man was real. And he tried to appease Tom by telling him that he had started celebrating before they arrived that evening. "I was tipsy and delusional, that's all." "And the supermarket?" Tom asked. "Hallucination from exhaustion. I was out late the night before. Look, discussion closed." Joe asked about Janet and Tom's engagement details, and he was off the hook, for now. The evening ended with a celebratory shot of tequila. The next afternoon, Tom returned to Joe's apartment to voice his opinion about the men without mouths. He believed the men were manifestations of Joe's past. Joe immediately got defensive. "What do you know about my past?" "Come on, Joe. Anyone who knows how to use a computer can find out that you were on several suspect lists." If Tom wanted to be a part of the family, he needed to show Joe respect by staying out of his business. He was about to throw Tom out, but paused when he realized that he needed to know whatever Tom thought he knew about him. Janet could never know about his past, and Joe had to make sure Tom agreed. So he took a breath. He listened while Tom rationalized that his history as a hitman could be causing some feelings of guilt and fear. Joe's expression of disbelief when he heard the word fear swayed Tom to clarify. He said, "The missing mouths symbolize your fear of possible informants." He suggested that Joe confess to his crimes. Confess? Joe was not hearing this. Confess to yourself, Joe. Leave it in the past for good. By the time Tom left, Joe felt confident that his past was in the virtual vault, concealed from his daughter. As he pondered the conversation he just had with his daughter's fiancé, were these men from his past? Are their mouths gone because he felt guilty about shutting them up permanently? He decided that a confession was worth it if these men, ghosts, whatever, stayed away. He spoke names from his past life into a small handheld recorder, the victims whose lives he took. He couldn't remember them all. Lives he sometimes tortured and always extinguished, not because they wronged him in any way, but because he was obeying an order. Afterward, he listened to his confession and, for the first time, felt regret for the things he had done. Ding! Distracted by the dryer alarm, he neglected to ensure the recording had been erased. He dropped the device into a brown paper bag. Then he placed the package in the drawer with his wallet and pistol. Several days passed, and Joe seemed to have his life under control again. As he sat on a bar stool, sipping his third whiskey, he glanced at the woman that was approaching to his left. He gasped and began shaking uncontrollably, yelling for the woman to back off, repeating the words, "No mouth," over and over again. Then he blacked out. He woke up to the sounds coming from the machines that monitored his vital signs. Janet and Tom sat vigil beside his hospital bed. He had to talk to Tom alone, so he asked Janet to get him coffee from the station in the solarium. He waited until he heard the clacking of Janet's heels fade as she walked down the corridor and then said, "I never hurt a woman. So why did this woman appear?" Tom reasoned that it might be guilt he felt about keeping his past life from his daughter. Then he excused himself, saying that he would help Janet carry coffees for them all, and he stepped into the hallway. It was true that Joe kept secrets from his daughter, but he did not want her to lose her worshipping vibe. Janet often called him her fearless and moral avenger. "I'm not afraid of anything," he'd say, "but I am afraid you'll get involved with someone like your old man." Tom paused outside Joe's room and pulled a cell phone from his hip pocket. He punched one number, lifted the phone to his ear, and said to the voice on the other end, "He'll be away from home until at least 9 a.m. tomorrow." Tom Jones had a tough assignment. 3 years ago, Joe had given up the cloak and dagger life, but Mike Gelato was not going to give up anything. Tom was ordered to keep an eye on Mr. Zappa. He wiggled his way into his daughter's life to make it easier for himself, but these recent events were unplanned and just falling into place like puzzle pieces. It was risky choosing psychology as his fictitious profession, but Joe was brawn, not brains. The confession suggestion was chancy too. Yep, it all fell into place. Mike Gelato put the disposable cell phone down. In 30 minutes, he would send Rossi to Joe Zappa's apartment. Nick Rossi's mission would be to find the recorder containing Joe's confession, and to plant a bug so that Mike could keep track of Joe's future actions. So, while Joe spent the night at Mercy Hospital, Nick was breaking into the Zappa's home. It didn't take long before Nick found the recorder. It was a bonus to find the gun, too. He wanted to make sure Joe's gun was empty. After all, he didn't want to get shot when he returned to kill the guy. He drove across town to report his success when the mission was complete. He handed the recorder over to Mike Gelato. Mike pressed play, and the men listened to the recording as Joe confessed to a dozen murders, all of which were ordered by Mike Gelato. Zappa had to go. He had gotten treacherous in his old age. Mike couldn't risk his involvement in any murders reaching the wrong ears. Tomorrow, Joe will be discharged from the hospital, and as soon as I know he's home, I'll send for you. Mr. Gelato sounded determined, and that made Nick anxious. Hours later, Joe stood in front of his apartment and fumbled with his keys. He unlocked the door and pushed it open. Janet would be on her way soon. He called her when the doctor discharged him, and she said she would meet him at his place. He wondered why she didn't pick him up at the hospital. He had to call a cab. He ambled to the bedroom to change his clothes. When he heard the crunch of the crumpled bag under his shoe as he entered the bedroom, his eyes instantly darted to the open drawer across the room. It held his wallet, his .38 Smith & Wesson, and most recently, the recorder with his confession on it. Janet must have been there to retrieve his medical cards from his wallet when he was taken to the hospital last night. She must have taken the recorder as well because it was missing. His confession was deleted. He was second-guessing himself. The thought of his daughter playing that message heightened his shame and feelings of irresponsibility to unbearable levels. He took the gun from the drawer in the nightstand and made sure it was loaded. It was not, and that was unusual. It would make him suspicious any other time, but instead he packed the cylinder with ammunition before pressing the muzzle into the flesh beneath his chin. That's how he shot his victims, not from behind or without their knowledge. Everyone deserved to know when they were about to die. Joe smirked and pulled the trigger. Across town, Nick sipped coffee with a shaky hand as he stared blankly at the newspaper. The bong of the church bells quickened the beat of his heart. He was a bundle of nerves, jumping at every noise he heard. By 5 o'clock, he questioned whether or not he'd missed Mike's signal. He did not know the job was done, that he would not have to shoot Joe, because Joe shot himself. Mike Gelato heard everything through the listening device hidden in Joe's bedroom, the gun being loaded, and Joe's nonchalant grunt right before the crack of the gunshot. Minutes after that, he heard a woman scream and her phone call confirming what he already knew. Joe Zappa had been shot by his own doing. Sirens followed. Joe Zappa was drifting in and out of awareness as he lay on the gurney rolling through the noisy halls of Mercy Hospital. Brightness filtered through his eyelids, lights flickering like vintage movie reels. He laughed silently, and he wondered if this was what everyone meant when they said, "Your life flashes before your eyes." "I kill myself," he thought, and he laughed again at the irony of that expression. In the operating room, a team of doctors and nurses, dressed in gowns and surgical masks, surrounded Joe's body. They labored diligently and efficiently, confident of a successful outcome. While they worked, Joe hovered above his unconscious form. He felt a tug, as if he were a kite on the end of a string, and he began to drift downward. But rather than seeing a masked surgical team of heroes saving his life, he observed a ravenous mob with no mouths mutilating him. He turned and soared to his certain death.
Chilling tales for dark nights.